When James Arthur Ray steamed 3 people to death, the central theme of his spiritual retreat had been death and rebirth. He even cribbed quotes and ideas from Bushido and made 55 of his followers watch The Last Samurai in preparation to die, metaphorically. He even played a game of death with them days before, where he dressed in a pure white Japanese robe and acted as God. He stalked the retreat and declared people dead as he touched them with a finger. Like a perverse game of tag, they would have to lay motionless on the ground, sometimes for hours. James also encouraged them to shave their heads to rid themselves of vanity. He told them to meditate for 36 hours in the desert without food and water. He told them, in no uncertain terms, quote, "You are not going to die. You might think you are, but you are not going to die." Then, when they had gathered in his homemade windowless dome, which he called the Sweat Lodge, James told them all, "Today is a good day to die." Then he ordered hot rocks to be added to the pit to bring the temperature up in the dome. And he would continue adding hot rocks and water as people screamed in the steam, vomited, and lost consciousness. 3 of his followers would die in that sweat lodge. 18 out of 55 would be hospitalized. James himself would flee the compound before police could show up, and he would be across the Arizona border entirely before they could arrest him. In all his self-help teaching, James had always preached, quote, "playing full on." His followers, mostly successful middle-aged business folk, came to him because he made their lives exciting again. They were educated, affluent, established. They paid him to give them extreme, life-changing experiences to help them achieve a sort of enlightenment. In short, they were asking him to remold their lives, just like James' father had done as a Tulsa preacher. James Ray has admitted as a self-help guru that he lacked the qualification to run the Sweat Lodge. The Sweat Lodge had effectively cooked his followers. But after serving 2 years in prison for negligent homicide, he was ready to begin coaching again. He's ready to turn his followers' death into a unique lesson for you, the consumer, and into more book royalties for James. And for just $15.95, you can purchase James' latest book, The Business of Redemption. One Amazon review by Brittany E. says, quote, "Using the deaths of his followers to peddle more crap." You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Lemense, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no duh on the internet and get to the facts.
On last week's episode, we talked about spirit warriors who paid for a meditation retreat in Sedona back in 2009 and were cooked to death in a steam lodge by their guru. Specifically, we asked some pretty fundamental questions about being human. Questions like, how far would we go to achieve self-actualization? And how does a reasonable, educated person agree to be cooked? If you haven't listened to that episode, we definitely suggest going back and checking it out. On today's episode of The Re-Engineered You, we're looking at the opposite side of the spirit warrior's case. We want to know, under the exact same circumstances, could we convince ourselves to steam a tent full of people? People are literally asking for an extreme experience. And we'll start by addressing the following 3 myths. Myth 1. James Arthur Ray was a minister's son, and he grew up seeing the positive effects of spiritual guidance. Could Ray's samurai worship sweat lodges and appropriation of Native American myth actually be a step in the right direction, spiritually? Myth 2. Gurus rely on something called performative success. They drive expensive cars, move in powerful circles, and pack their books with endorsements by celebrities. But without an actual trade, how do they do it? Is it just public speaking all the way to the bank? Myth 3. Could James Ray have thought he was doing his followers a service when he poured water over hot rocks? Ultimately, this is the question the jury had to answer. Was Ray a murderous huckster or a legit spiritual leader who made a simple miscalculation? We're going to get in the mind of James Arthur Ray and the minds of self-help gurus in general. But first, I want to read a few of Ray's more controversial quotes to Joe.
So in the last episode, we basically laid out a bit of a monster. We went through what James Ray did with the Steam Lodge, and I almost feel after that there's no coming back. I mean, as far as like turning around and looking at James Ray in a new light. So how do we perceive James Ray in a way that isn't just look at this monster?
I see what you're saying. This isn't like a few affairs or stealing a few $1,000,000. You start cooking people to death is a little bit different level, right?
Right. It's going to be very hard for me to see a normalized person that you and I could have been after this.
Well, Arthur Ray is a lights-out public speaker, and he started as a fan of public speaker. His father was a Tulsa, Oklahoma preacher. So he would sit in the front row and listen to his father's sermons. That was a big influence on him. And what he used to hear when he was a young boy, is one of the very famous quote is from the Bible, is it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. And he described how angry he felt that biblical verse made him question his own family situation, even question God. His parents didn't have any money. They didn't have nice clothes. They didn't own a home. They lived on the same property as the church, like a lot of pastors do in the smaller churches.
Okay. So he was mad that they could pass through an eye of a needle?
I don't know what he was pissed off about. I think he wanted nice stuff.
I think that's what it sounds like to me.
This is what he said. This is what he concluded. Here's what I know. It is a sin to be poor. And that belief stayed with him.
Well, we're not humanizing him very quickly with that quote. It's a sin to be poor. Okay.
He's a jerk from all. So this is funny, too, because Joe, of course, is the king of narratives. And we all tell our own narratives, right, Joe?
Yeah.
So when he tells his stories, his self-help stories to his followers and his race to fame, he described himself as a kid. And he said, this is what he said about himself. I was the kid with the big Coke bottle glasses and the buck teeth, who everybody made fun of him. So he kind of painted himself as this gangly, nerdy, right, that you see in the 80s movies.
Right, that's what every model describes themselves as when they're asked, what did you look like as a kid? And they're like going down a runway. They're like, oh, I had Coke bottle glasses and weird teeth.
So he does that rags to riches story, they'll say bullshit story.
Right.
But later, a classmate told the Arizona Republic, which is the big paper in Phoenix, that his story of his childhood was outright lie. It was totally embellished. There's no truth to it. He carried himself. He was confident. He was popular. And he says, as far as being poor was, I don't know what they're talking about. His family made more money than most people's.
Okay. Okay, just for our sake, I wanted to find out, because we have James Ray saying we were poor, and his classmate saying, the classmate says they made money. I looked up what a pastor's salary in Tulsa, Oklahoma was. It's more than I make. The lower percentile, according to salary.com, in the 25th percentile, it's $78,000 a year. in the 90th percentile, it's 120,000. So that does not sound like be angry about how poor you are kind of poor.
No, that's what engineers make it. Microsoft and Intel.
Right. The happiness index, the 80,000 to 100,000 is in the lower spectrum of that.
You work 1 day a week.
Right.
You got a free house too. Poor James.
Yeah, I feel bad. Yeah.
So after he went to high school, he didn't go into ministry. He went into sales, and he started working for AT&T. So a big international company, right?
Okay.
He started at Southwest Bell as a telemarketer. He just sold services and equipment. Now, he was good at this, and he was selling, Joe, this is funny, cutting-edge technology back then was stuff like call waiting. I was like, wow. Do you even know what that is? You're probably born after that anyways.
I've seen it in movies.
Can you hold for a minute? I got to call you right back.
Right.
So he got a knack for this business. He was an expert in it. He got promoted regularly. He started managing stores, and he relocated several times and set up stores, and they were successful. So then he'd move again. Finally, he got a pretty big break, and he became a trainer at the AT&T School of Business in Atlanta. So now he was training people. So he was a sales trainer.
Okay, this does not, to me, sound like the trajectory of a life coach, unless, well, I mean, we're going to reveal this as we go through the episode, but I would think the life coach would have to start out learning how to hike through nature, how to, mentor people at the YMCA, and then eventually work their way into spiritualism. This does not sound to me like the route to self-actualization.
Yeah, I see a baby being raised by some tigers.
Yeah,
commune, right? And this kid is very wise. God has touched him.
Yeah,
and they coddle him along with, yeah.
I want my life coaches to be like Robin Williams from every movie he's in. This does not feel right to me.
Well, now I said he got his big break as a sales trainer, but then he got his real big break, and he started working for best-selling author, motivational guru, business big time, Stephen Covey. Have you read his book?
I have not.
Let's look it up right now if you can. It's the 7 Habits of Successful People. It has been translated in so many different languages all over the world. It's an international bestseller for years. Everyone loves his stuff. He is the driest, boring public speaker you've ever heard in your life. His content is amazing. His
rated
principle
4.9 on Audible out of 5. Huge ratings on Goodreads. Wild amounts of sales. So everyone loved the book. You're saying he wasn't that great at public speaking?
And it went on for generations. He was very sought after, just in our snootiness of we like to tell stories and stuff. So Stephen Covey's not a big storyteller.
Okay.
So he started working for him as a sales trainer, to doing his seminars for him. And that's when he really got his taste for self-help. Telephones, self-help.
Okay. So Todd and I have both read about mastery and the 10,000 hours from, Malcolm Gladwell popularized the idea that you have to work on something for 10,000 hours to achieve mastery. It sounds like his mastery came from talking to people on the phone and just telling stories to the individual. And then, of course, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So, like, he goes from mastery of speaking to people on the phone to being tutored under a master writer.
And getting people to say yes for all those telemarketing calls. And then all those sales meetings, getting the most out of his salespeople, getting the new people to be the top, and then to set those branches up to go on their own. He didn't know what he's working towards, but all those reps turned into his next life.
Okay, and his next life is something spiritually rewarding?
This to him was about the bucks. So he worked for Stephen Covey for a while, and then he started his own consulting group. So he set up a one-man shop. And then he changed the name to Ray Transformation Technologies. And he had people who did marketing for him, right? But then he realized the real money, the big money, is in keynote speaking. It was, guess what, Joe? Way more lucrative and way less time consuming.
Okay. So when you joked about his father working 1 day a week, this is what he's working toward, keynote speaking.
I didn't think of it like that. But instead of all day on Sunday, he'll just work 1 hour.
Right.
And make 20 grand. So it wasn't long before the multi-level marketing, network marketers, they always need public speakers, motivational, roo-roo people.
Right.
So they can sell more of their crap. So soon he was signed by Herbalife and Amway.
Okay. So if we want to feel any better about James Ray, we are not getting there. We are into Amway. So
I don't have a problem with any of this stuff so far.
Okay.
We're not to the. I want us to do this with a re-engineered you.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be nice to make $20,000 an hour?
I swear to God, I will do our grudges episode at Amway. Okay. Well, just so we don't get too far and cover James's entire life before we can talk about the stuff he was preaching back in the Steam Lodge. I want to get to the Bushido and the Indian teachings and why sweat lodges. Because now that we're at him at Amway peddling crap, I actually want to make a comparison here, if that's okay with you.
Please. Anytime there's sweat lodge or heat, Joe and I with our high blood pressure, we all get a little nervous.
I'm nauseous reading about it. So I want to point out something interesting. James Ray really sort of gravitated toward placebos. We talked in the last episode how the bitter pill effect is one of the strongest placebo effects out there, and it actually works. When he was peddling fake herbs, I mean, I don't know if Herbalife has fake stuff now or not. I know Amway sure as heck had gimmicky things to sell as a pyramid scheme.
Anti-aging stuff with no science or anything to back it up.
Right, exactly. James Ray took real things and later in his career and tried to turn them basically into anti-aging, placebo, bitter pill, like anything he could get his hands on that made people feel like it was affecting them, that made people feel like they were, tapping into secrets, tapping into fountains of youth, getting into things that would, give them an in to the secret to actualization. So the first question I really want to get to is there real purpose, real benefits to the things he was tapping into? We talk about, tests, why people crave these sort of tests to themselves. In our first episode of this, we talked about how his sweat lodge victims, they asked to be steamed. They wanted to go to a sweat lodge. What is the most extreme thing you can think of, like a sweat lodge that you've done? Something that you volunteered to do. Skydiving for me comes to mind. I've never been skydiving. People who go, they seem, I'm a very risk-averse people, so it seems like, why would you throw yourself out of a perfectly good airplane?
Yeah, I did. I went skydiving, and I'm not one of those people that said they've always wanted to do that. But it was a very extreme thing. And I boxed for many years. I consider that pretty extreme, going there and let someone beat your brains out. And knowing it's going to happen is like the worst part of it. But yeah, once you're falling, you go from a point where you're falling in the air to flying, and it's just amazing. It's the most fun you're ever going to have.
Okay.
It's flirting with death, though. What if the thing doesn't open?
Right. So can I ask a weird question?
Please.
What happened the week before you went skydiving?
I don't remember anything about it.
Do you remember what happened the week after you went skydiving?
No.
Okay.
It's a good bookmark. Is that where you're going?
That is exactly where I'm going. When we do these extreme events and activities, it serves as a very a let's say, an effective placebo in your life, because it almost is like a celebration. They break up life's monotony. They force us to live in the now. If you're a fan of Eckhart Tolle, you have to train your mind and meditate and be conscious of the now to live in it, or you pay a jerk to put you in a sweat lodge and make you almost die, or jump out of a plane. You can do either.
But it is different. A lot of times we go on vacations and stuff, and we eat out at restaurants. We do stuff that we do when we're pretty much at home.
Yeah.
There's nothing really that memorable except for the pictures. And unless you do swim with dolphins or see something amazing or meet someone amazing, it just runs into a normal work day or work week.
Right. I remember listening to a documentary about memory, and basically, if you ever feel like you go on vacation and you go somewhere new and it feels like time is slowing down, it's because your brain is absorbing more. You're taking in more information.
That's interesting. I even have an experience, and I'm sure you've had this, where people have a horrible, just a nightmare vacation, but they want to tell you all about it.
Yeah, they want to show you slides of their...
Yeah. And, you won't believe this happened, and they're emotionally charged and how they got screwed over. But you can tell that they're actually like living off of it.
Yeah. The best is getting trapped somewhere, like a lodge or in a cruise ship or something. It's a terrible, frightening experience, but you're actually somewhere like hospitable and warm. So it's not actually dangerous.
I pray to God. I can barely handle you for 1 hour a week. I hope I'm never trapped with you for over an hour.
You get locked in a snow lodge with me or like a cabin. We're talking about like the densest, strangest stuff possible. I will bore you to death. But James would take fake Bushido tenets. Not fake, but like... let's say the movie version of Bushido tenets from The Last Samurai, and then he would take bits from that and reinterpret it. So like this game of telephone, except with media. Or he would take Native American teachings, like sweat lodges, and he would take these tenets that have spiritual value, and he would extremify them. He would turn them into, the bad vacation, so that... It serves as these.
It's like props for a stage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're building the show, and
when James Ray busts out of the closet, he's wearing a pure white kimono, and he's telling you you're dead and you got to lay down on the ground for 3 hours. You are going to remember that. And the actual benefit. So if we want to talk about real benefits from doing these things, they force you to re-examine and reaffirm your core values. Now, we have had episodes where we've talked about the power of writing about your values for 15 minutes a day. And this has been proven by multiple studies. We have a couple episodes if you want to go back and check them out. Just Google for any episode where we talk about value writing. Re-examining your values, your internal core values, not I'm beautiful, I make grades, but the ones that are like I'm strong and I'm intelligent, what do I hold dear, what actually matter to me. You can journal about that for 15 minutes a day, or you can have James Ray touch you and tell you you're dead and you have to lie there for 3 hours and re-examine your values that way. I might argue that journaling is a slightly healthier option, but if that's what you need, is for a guru to tell you, now sit still and do this, that can be effective too.
I think the social part too, Joe, of these people going to this together, all being middle class, kind of elite, educated, buddy together. Can you believe what we did last night? That was so intense, and I'm getting through close to a breakthrough, and this is the 7th one of these I've been on.
Right. The camaraderie. I mean, nobody wants to talk with each other about how they journaled for 15 minutes, but if you survive something extreme together, that has value. That is a social grooming element.
Brothers and sisters in this, right?
Right, exactly. Now, the sweat lodges part, the claim that you sweat out toxins, that is an old claim. I'm going to anger people who believe in toxins and sweat lodges. Sorry to our listeners that are like, but I get toxin retreats and juice cleanses and things like that to get rid of toxins. Your liver processes and removes toxins for you. Feces is like 30% bacteria, and you urinate excess minerals and bacteria. You sweat water and dissolved minerals in trace amounts of urea. So the smell of your sweat is not actually toxins being sweated out. If you go to a sweat lodge, that's the smell of bacteria playing in the pools of sweat and reproducing in it. So I apologize to anyone who is in a sweat lodge listening to our episode right now. You're not sweating out toxins.
Just thinking of like those old, fat, really rich white guys sitting in a steam thing.
Yeah.
Right? You know what I mean? Yeah.
Oh, it's relaxing, and it does wonders for your muscles. It resets your core temperature. There is real value to the stuff. It's just not the self-help hokum that we're looking at. Okay, so let's take one of them. Meditation and breathing. While you're meditating and you're doing the deep, calming breaths, the slow in through the nose. Wait. I'm bad at meditating. It's in through the mouth, out through the nose?
In through the nose, out through the nose, or in through the nose, out through the mouth.
This tells you how I meditate. If you ever listen to me on the phone, like if I accidentally record myself eating, I sound like a warthog. Okay, so back to our breathing.
I like to brag, but I do yoga twice a week. And I have my own professional meditation coach, Jamie, from Yo-Yo Yogi.
Okay. I slam coffee and breathe heavy over a monitor while I write all night. So we're in different boats. But let's meditate. We're going slow in through the nose. And then out somewhere else. I think it's the mouth. This, when you are doing breathing right, it activates a two-way circuit between the limbic system and the limbic neurons that control our breathing, and they signal relaxation. Radiolab had a great episode where they talked about this neuron cluster basically in the back of your head where, it's got this wiring to your breathing. And if you breathe slow, as if you are calm, it will signal these neurons to be like, hey, we are actually calm, and your brain registers it. So if you ever wonder if there is real value to meditation, aside from taking 15 minutes to examine your own personal values, just the part where you breathe slowly and calmly actually does calm down your brain. Your hormones will adjust. Your cortisol will go lower. You'll feel better. So we didn't want to talk about James Ray and be like, everything he did was false. He did accidentally, as well as many gurus, accidentally hit on good practices. He also hit on some deadly practices. Like he while delivering these bitter pills, accidentally delivered some poison too, in the form of baking people. In our early notes for talking about life coaches and gurus, we want to ask, is there actually a trade or a vocation to being a guru? You had the great phrase in our notes, Todd. You put in performative success. Could you talk a little bit about what that means to you?
Performative success means to me just building up a brand and image of yourself and selling this, that you can make people like a performance car and take them further than they've ever been before.
Okay. So as a life coach, people see that I'm driving a Bentley and they see my nice house on Instagram and they're like, this guy has it together. I'll ask him questions. In reality, I'm renting the car and it's my friend's house.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. It's just a picture. But I think a lot of it is like we're talking about before. Is this an actual trade? What do you have your 10,000 hours? Like you were talking about the Malcolm Gladwell. What are you an absolute expert on? And usually it's just so general and so spammy.
Sales.
I'm a life coach. I'm a sales guru, right? I'm a motivational speaker. It's spam, spam, spam.
Oh, I did not know he was doing sales calls in Amway for his mastery hours. That is amazing. Okay, so there is actually a life coach vocation and a life coach federation. I thought life coach, before we started this episode, this is one of those things where I started the research thinking that it was going to lead me down a road of hokum and bunk and nonsense, and that I would gleefully, nerd giggle as I rip apart skeptical things. I found an actual, it's called the International Coaching Federation, and I found them to be very reputable. I read through their website. I looked at who was certified through them. Okay, so just to sort of tell you what their levels are. And by certification, I mean like I looked up how much their coaches make and how respected they are in the business world. And the answer is pretty shocking. First off, what it takes to be a coach. They say with their IFC certifications, an associate certified coach trains for about 60 hours and has 100 or more experience hours, meaning they have actually been coaching somebody for about 100 hours. So after 100 hours, what would you feel comfortable doing? Like, this isn't mastery, but this is a little bit of comfort, right?
A little bit. I guess you could help on real basic things.
Yeah, I think I was trained to do my job at work for about 40 hours.
You learn a lot on the job, though.
Exactly. I think that's the real takeaway here is they give you 60 hours of training or so, and it looks like online college classes. I actually downloaded a couple of these programs just to see what it looked like.
Isn't the human brain a little more complicated than that, Joe?
A little bit.
That's one work week.
Yeah. Yeah, 40 hours is not very long unless you're like intensively shadowing somebody. The ICF, they do things at the learner's pace. And then once you get to professional level, they have levels. Professionals have about 125 training hours, but they really put pressure on the coaching hours. A professional has 500 hours of coaching. A quote-unquote master has 200 or more hours training in class and 2,500 plus hours of experience. So they are pushing to a quarter of those what Gladwell says the mastery is at. Now, here's something that if it sounds like I am endorsing them or they've paid me or something, I'm not. I just wanted to know what they and businesses considered the qualifications of a life coach so that we can become the legit version of what James Ray was claiming to be. Life coaches do not coach people with mental illness. That is something that I found to be not upheld by other gurus. So if you go online and you hire a quote-unquote guru, like you hire a James Ray, or even like Tony Robbins doesn't even make this distinction. His website, he does not make a distinction between people who need a therapist and who need a life coach. Life coaches do not use psychotherapy. Counseling and psychotherapy is a long-term process. And you are changing self-destructive habits, whereas coaching... a life coach will work with a client. They'll take you aside. They recognize they are not a healthcare professional. What their job is to ask you, what are your goals? What do you want in life? What are you aiming for? Aim big, but what are you aiming for? And then identify the obstacles and problems that you're going to encounter, where your stumbling block's going to be, where the logs that you're going to trip over. And then they help you sort of take control of your life and work toward that goal. To kind of summarize this, the skills of an actual life coach, not a James Ray, but a certified life coach, they rephrase, they reiterate, they summarize, they use affirmations, they use interjections and clarifications. They basically make you reflect. So the takeaway to me, we want to ask the question, are these gurus enlightened, or are they just shrewd businessmen? My takeaway is that gurus pretend to have spiritual enlightenment, like Mark Hill and James Ray, whereas actual qualified life coaches, they really just seem to be geared toward reinforcing your values and helping you to set goals. And if you're ever wondering, is life coaching for me as a job? How much do they make? The average U.S. life coach salary is $62,000 a year. It goes up from there, definitely, but that's the average. So after talking about the qualifications, one might argue that recording the Re-Engineered You is kind of self-helpy. If somebody asks you to coach them, would you feel comfortable doing it? And also, could I convince you to become certified as a life coach?
When we started this show, we put it in on iTunes and all this in self-improvement, self-help. And then it came to self-awareness. But we've been branded by outsiders as educational. And the more we study, so in the beginning, yes. 72 weeks ago, yes. But now, no way. Because the more I learn about this stuff, the more I realize how much more I need to learn before I start teaching anybody else.
Right.
What about you?
I would do it just for the resume padding, honestly. But as far as like making that my mastery hours, making that my focus in life, I don't think so, because I think you're right. I had somebody ask me how my psychology podcast was going. And I told them, we're not psychologists, doctors, anything. We're at best, we are history researchers. And we just happen to have to go through, studies. So no, I don't think I would. I would rather be a researcher and somebody who can advise you on what happened in history. What are the best studies that are coming out that talk about your problem? But life coach, that I respect it, and I respect what these certifications are trying to do. I'll just put it that way.
Now, the average, you said the salary for a U.S. life coach is $62,000. That's the average median salary.
Mm-hmm.
Well, James Arthur Ray didn't want to have anything to do with that. And I'll tell you, this is how he's what $62,000 is not what he was in this for. He was in this for the big bucks.
That is a record scratch for him.
So he went to junior college, community college, dropped out. Now, he didn't go to the seminary or go to spiritual college like his father did. He wasn't a philosopher. He wasn't a medical doctor. He used his childhood as watching these sermons and seeing the power and the help that his dad gave to his followers. Then he got in sales and gave lots of sales meetings to talk people to do into things. So he started to blend those two skills together. Then he went and worked for Stephen Covey and goes, oh, wow, there's a lot of money in this book, motivational speaking stuff. So then he got his big break. He was a narrator on the hit movie book called The Secret, the Jack Canfield Chicken's Soup for the Soul.
Oh, okay.
So then he got a lot of fame. That's when he went on Oprah. That's when Oprah was gushing, saying how great James Ray was.
Wait, hold on. He was the narrator. He wasn't the writer?
He wasn't the writer. He was just one. There was a bunch of motivational speaker narrators on. There's about 5 of them.
Okay.
And they're all big time. So that's what he do. You write a book. You get a following. Next thing you know, you're doing keynote speeches for Herbalife and Amway at $10,000 a pop. Then you start doing what, Joe? Weekly retreats, sweat lodges. So you charge middle-aged people who want this extreme experience $10,000. Now, they're not taking them to Malibu here. They're taking them in the middle of the fucking desert here.
Right. We're in, the Arizona desert.
So when he did bake to death of all of his followers, there were 55 students in there for that week, Joe. So do the math. $550,000 for 1 week out in a tent in the middle of nowhere in Arizona.
Right. We're at $500,000 for a sweat tent.
So these middle-aged people, these well-to-do, affluent people, educated, why were they taking $10,000 and spending it in this way? What were they getting out of it?
Right. So when I buy herbal supplements that don't do anything, I purchase them from Winco for about $10 a bottle. What were these people getting out of their extreme desert experience? Or here's another good question. Does it matter that James Ray wasn't an expert? Does it matter if, I mean, obviously if it hurts somebody, but let's just say he didn't hospitalize a dozen people. He didn't kill 3 people. Does that legitimize what he's doing? Like if
he's getting results and these people aren't being taken advantage, they have the money and they're coming back for more, there must be some benefit they're getting out of it.
Right. If the bitter pill works, what does it matter who's giving it to you, basically? So I think it's the spiritual side of things. This is going to sound crazy, but I just want to talk about, I mean, like, it is bizarre for me, a skeptic, to say, you know, the difference is that James Ray isn't actually giving them the spiritual experience they're buying. I mean, they are effectively paying for a bitter pill, but I, a skeptic, saying they didn't get the religious part of it. They're not getting something real behind what James Ray is doing or his intent. Okay, so here's a good question. When you see a guru or you see in the news about a cult leader who had, you know, a bunch of sports cars, does it make you think that he is less or more spiritual?
Definitely less spiritual. They're more into stuff.
Okay. Would it surprise you to know that a actual spiritual advisor, not a cult leader, but a person who has schooled themselves in it, markets themselves in it, and is on ZipRecruiter as a spiritual advisor, makes between $41,000 and $166,000?
That's a big range. So I'm going to cut it right in half.
The average, yes, please.
I think that's so. Let's say 75,000, 80,000.
Okay.
That's depending where you live, above average income, right?
Absolutely. That is the average for a spiritual advisor is right at the beginning of the happiness index. And to put that into context, the average for a school teacher is half that, about 34,000.
Who went to school for 4 years.
Right.
Screened a little bit more carefully.
Right.
Had to actually interview against other people, do extra assignments and volunteer work.
Right. Now, if you're becoming a spiritual advisor, or if you're, you know, paying for the services of a spiritual advisor, the reason that range is so massive, $41,000 to $166,000, according to ZipRecruiter, the range is there because on the low end, you have people who are not that convincing, not that helpful. They got into it with a bag of crystals and they can tell you how to realign your chakras without any actual knowledge of life or spiritualism or any one religion. They picked up all their things from like the corner hobby store with a big painted eye on the front and a bunch of Egyptian hieroglyphs on the building.
But for some reason, Joe, people with income and education are attracted to these people. Well, they're good at least the sales part of it.
Right. That's where we get into the high end of that earning, $166,000. Those are people who are convincing, have experience. They're, you know, they sound like they are giving you real good spiritual advice. And maybe they come from an actual religious discipline. Maybe they have pastoral experience, or they went to a religious college, or they spent time in, you know, Tibet, or they went on a pilgrimage somewhere. So we're not going to condone or condemn spiritual leaders. I actually, if they are professional, if they accomplish what the person is seeking them out for, if they hand you a bitter tea and it makes you wince, but it gives you that placebo effect, I think that's a legitimate trade. I actually think that is a vocation. Somebody to listen to you, somebody to give you a placebo that you've asked for, somebody who puts you into a safe environment and just talks about your problems. If they don't have the they don't have to be a psychologist to do that. I think just having somebody to guide you spiritually is actually not that bad of an idea.
And if you're not borrowing money from friends to pay for it or
right,
racking up your credit card, why not, right?
Right. If it is done responsibly and it's done with consent and you're not trying to sell yourself as something else. If a spiritual advisor starts telling you how to invest for your retirement, I will have questions. That's when I will get concerned. So we are going to put spiritual advisor in its own slot. That is another profession James Ray pretended to be when in fact he was just good at sales. So let's enough about bashing James Ray for wearing all these different hats that he actually didn't own. Let's talk about how to make ourselves into a guru. Okay, so first let's pick professions. Do you want to be the spiritual advisor or do you want to be the life coach?
Oh, definitely the spiritual advisor.
Okay.
I'm wise beyond my years.
You're wearing, I don't know if nobody can see this because this is audio, but Todd is now wearing big bulky beads and a very flowy robe. I'm going life coach, so I'm wearing like a cardigan and like a flat top trendy hat and things like that.
I do not want to do the sweat lodge things. I want to have sex with my followers.
Okay. I just want to charge them a lot for getting them to a higher earning potential. So I'm going with goal setting. You're going with
lust.
Spiritual healing through sex. So let's become the best quote unquote gurus we can. This comes from a Forbes article, How to Become a Guru in 4 Easy Steps. I love this article. It's tongue in cheek. It's joking. But really, this is actually good advice. Like I read through it and I'm like, oh my God, this would actually work. So the first advice this writer gives from Forbes, this is Michael Sheen, become a magus. So a magus, in the old term, means that they would have a presence about them. They would have to adopt an identifiable style of clothes. So Todd wearing his beads and robe will look like a spiritual leader. Me and my cardigan and trendy hat will look like somebody who is successful, a life coach. Steve Jobs had his signature turtleneck. Like he had the black turtleneck with that chain around it. It was very noticeable, very kind of odd. But good gurus look a little odd. Or they speak distinctively without showing any doubt whatsoever. Gary Vaynerchuk had his uber confident rasp, according to this article. And you would do feats too. A magus does feats. So like Richard Branson took his transatlantic hot air balloon ride. These are all pointed out by the Forbes article, by the way. I just wanted to repeat it because it's just good advice. Todd mentioned that he wrote a book, The Secret.
That's right.
So he, James Ray did not actually write The Secret, but his name stamped on it, his face in it, and his voice as the narrator meant that he had a Bible to rely on. That is advice number 2 for becoming a guru.
I'm an authority. I'm an expert. Look at this. People buy my books. Don't
just peddle a Bible. Have a Bible. Write one. Doesn't have to be huge. Doesn't have to be thick. Doesn't have to be dense. But if you have something that you have written, even if you are a scholar, and you're like, okay, I wrote a couple of really popular articles that were peer reviewed, that's your Bible.
And a lot of the mega churches, we did an episode on ego talking about exposing Pastor Mark Driscoll. What these big megachurch pastors will do, they'll talk about the real Bible. They'll also write their own Bible for their own church.
Yes. They'll have a syllabus. Like they'll be like, here's the Bible we learn from, but here are the sections we actually read. Ryan Holiday, the notorious promoter of Stoicism, wrote his own book on Stoicism, even though there's a perfectly good book by Marcus Aurelius hanging around. Tim Ferriss had the 4-Hour Body. Everybody who is a guru, gurus their own material. start a church. I mean, that's kind of you get a congregation going, you get a group of people going who can reinforce that you are successful and reinforce that your stuff does actually help.
Keep the lights turned on.
Right. And you don't need a physical brick and mortar church. On the internet, all you need is a website. Ryan Holiday has the Daily Stoic, and people go there to every day read, how am I going to be more stoic? Now, this is a piece of advice this writer from Forbes uses. He says, start a war, not an actual religious war. But human beings they like to rally around something. We like to take up the sword and go to battle. So tell your followers that there's going to be something that they're going to have to face, whether that's a sweat lodge or a stay in the desert. You're going to take them on an extreme hike. You're going to need them to defend against, they're going to need to defend their values and morals at some point. Heck, news media, when pandering to their political side, will oftentimes allude to a eventual day where they're going to have to defend their values against the other side of the political spectrum.
And there's no such thing as bad press.
Exactly.
You get labeled and attacked, or your family tries to get you as a cult. It's going to make you dig in even more and stay more committed.
Right. This is all, by the way, the last part, start a war, is super ironic because James Ray basically started a war against his own negative press. So his book that came out, the one that he wrote was, what was it, Redemption? Okay, it was The Business of Redemption.
Oh, boy.
So even if nothing inside the book is about his negative press, the title itself is basically declaring a war for his followers to go on to seek redemption, go against your own negativity. And his newest book really should have been called I Got Overpaid for Spiritual LARPing by Using My Father's Ministry Skills and Cooked a Bunch of People and Only Served 2 years in Prison. That is a little bit too lengthy of a title.
It's a little long.
It's a little long. Yeah, so the Business of Redemption is what it ended up being.
This was, of course, a very sensitive subject with, everyone in Arizona, especially his victims' families, his other students. But he fled the scene when this happened. It would have served him a lot better, Joe, if he would have tried to help as a first responder and just get in his plane and take off with his goons. So he lawyered up right away, had all the money to defend himself, being a rich man. So he was convicted of negligent homicide, and he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. But the judge allowed to be served concurrently. So that means he would only serve 2 years. And he ended up serving only 20 months for 3 dead people.
Can I choose to believe that it was because he gave a movie-esque rallying speech in the middle of the courtroom? That he just turned his ministry skills on, like a magic power, he turned it on the jury?
So three lives lost, only 20 months in prison. He was ordered to pay $57,000 in restoration. We call it restoration? What do you call it when you pay?
Oh, restitution?
Restitution to the 3 victims. So what does that come out to? for your kid or your wife being gone, you get $12,000 or $15,000 or whatever. Not enough.
I'm doing the James Ray math. I'm like, okay, how many more sweat lodge ceremonies do I have to hold to pay that back?
This is ridiculous. So he did get sued for $3 million, but his insurance company, he was somehow insured. I don't know how you insure that, a campground insurance or something, but the insurance company had to pay $3 million to these people. So it didn't come out of James Ray's pocket.
Oh, that is wild. Okay.
Now I don't know, have you ever watched his documentary? He got out of prison, and there's a new documentary out. It's not new now. It's called Enlightened Us. And it's on CNN if you want to watch it.
No, I had no idea.
It talked about getting out of prison, having done all this damage in the past, and starting over with such a horrible reputation. Now he had a quote in this film, and I'm gonna read it to you. On October 8th, this is Ray himself.
Okay.
On October 8th, 2009, I was involved in a terrible accident and I lost 3 friends. People I really care about. And then he started to cry.
I have problems with that sounding like he was in a car accident that wasn't his fault.
Like he was the victim of all this.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, when I watched the documentary, and I watched it twice, he whined about the expenses of his old speaking business. He talked about, well, to put on these seminars, I had to put all this money in this. Joe, it infuriates you. He never once talked about how much he made at the end.
Right.
Which we know by simple math was millions.
Right. We were talking about earlier how it's like $100,000 for a basic speaking gig.
Now, he's still speaking, Joe, but his crowds have gotten much, much smaller. So he's not talking to big Herbalife, Amway conventions with 10, 20,000 people. Now they're 10 to 15 people.
Okay.
Now, his latest book came out March 14th, 2019. It's called Harmonic Wealth, The Secret of Attracting the Life You Want.
Good Lord.
It got 3 reviews. So he's no longer Mr. New York Times bestseller.
Okay. Are we buying that book?
Now, the whole time I watched this documentary, the second time, I just squirmed the whole time. And it was just making me angrier and angrier. Joe, imagine how the victims' families felt. Nobody should aim to become a guru. Tony Robbins is not a job title. And anytime you blend life goals, financial advice, and spiritualism, you are flirting with cult leadership hard. However, if you really want to brand yourself as a leader of men and women, or you want to find professional life advice without using a therapist, there are respectable professions out there. Spiritual advisor is a real title. That's something we tend to forget when the word guru rears its head. And the two are not the same. A qualified spiritual advisor won't charge you $10,000 for a week's worth of starvation and watching Tom Cruise movies. A good spiritual advisor will cost about $20 to $120 an hour, depending on the flavor of spiritualism. And they can offer real perspective and wisdom in matters of self and spirit. A life coach, on the other hand, will cost a little more, typically in the neighborhood of $100 to $300 per hour. But a good life coach will help you set tangible goals, and they'll give you some ladder rungs you might be missing. A certified life coach will check on you personally 3 to 4 times a week to make sure you're on the road to achieving what you set out for yourself. But most importantly, a good life coach will share their qualifications up front, and they'll be open to scrutiny, both of their action plan they give you and their credentials. Nobody has all the answers. Nobody is both a spiritual sage and the perfect financial planner. There are qualified people you can hire to help chart a life course. But if you meet a convincing, charismatic intellectual who claims to have the secret to self-actualization and the cure to the human condition, stay far away from them and their tortured tent. You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for each of our episodes. We also appreciate feedback, and we love spirited debates.
We have a new episode every week. We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.